Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's Game of Thrones theory video, Lessons from Aegon's Conquest. This video is about my theories for how Game of Thrones and the Song of Ice and Fire novels will end, specifically focused on what lessons can be learned from the history of Westeros, in particular, Aegon's Conquest. This video contains information from Song of Ice and Fire novels and reference books such as The World of Ice and Fire. So, I felt inspired to make this video because I saw several YouTube videos and other posts and comments online that seemed to mock the theory that I and many others subscribe to about Daenerys, Jon Snow, and Tyrion riding dragons and fighting against the White Walkers and what many are calling the War for the Dawn. If you want to hear more about my predictions on how I think this will go down, you can check out my video update on how I think Game of Thrones will end, which I'll put a link to in the description below. However, I've seen many videos from channels I like and respect that openly mock this theory, as they describe this scenario as Jon, Dany, and Tyrion riding off triumphantly into glorious battle, and Bran will warg into a dragon, and Rickon will ride a unicorn, and Sansa will marry a handsome prince and live in a beautiful castle, and Jon and Dany will marry and pick daisies in a beautiful field, and Big Rainbow will come down and melt the White Walkers away, and all the people of Westeros will get in a huge circle, hold hands, and sing Kumbaya, my lord, Kumbaya. And then the giant sun with the big smiley face descends down upon them. Cute little elves are dancing around, and anyway, you get the point. Which is, this scenario is too much of a happy fairy tale to be the ending of a series as dark and realistic as Game of Thrones. However, the people who say this, in my humble opinion, are doing something that this guy created a match for.
It was a jump to conclusions, Matt. You see, it would be this mat that you would put on the floor and would have different conclusions written on it that you could jump to.
It's a pretty giant leap to assume just because Tyrion, Dany, and Jon ride dragons to fight the White Walkers, then that must mean it's going to be all happy and fairy tale-ish with leprechauns and unicorns and the whole lot. What logic do you use to draw that conclusion? You know, I know Dany, Tyrion, and Jon are fan favorites, so them teaming up does seem kind of fanboyish, but they are also three of the most well-established characters, established to be on long-term story arcs, so it makes sense that their stories might lead them together. But more to the point, just because they team up does not automatically mean it's sunshine and rainbows. That's narrow-minded and jumping to false conclusions. I don't see why this venture couldn't be dark-toned in nature in the typical George R.R. Martin fashion, and just because they battle the White Walkers doesn't automatically mean it will be a storybook or fairy tale battle. And to anyone who thinks having a team of 3 Targaryen relatives, according to this theory, riding dragons and fighting a war in Westeros is un-George R.R. Martin-like, are forgetting about these 3 guys. Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys, who I won't just say these 3 guys would disagree with such a sentiment, I'll go as far to say they prove it wrong. So let's get into who these people are. For those of you who haven't read the Song of Ice and Fire novels or the World of Ice and Fire who may not know, Aegon Targaryen, also known as Aegon the Conqueror, was the first Targaryen king of Westeros. He conquered Westeros with his 2 sister wives Visenya and Rhaenys. Each of them were dragon riders to which the 7 kingdoms of Westeros at the time had no defense. Their armies were much smaller, and they started out with only a few houses houses as allies, but they would go on to conquer 6 of the 7 kingdoms of Westeros. Aegon first landed at the site that is now known as King's Landing and conquered the castles along the Blackwater first. They would then go on to defeat Lord Harren, who had just built Harrenhal, which was a castle so huge and strong it was said to be impenetrable. However, Aegon rode on his dragon, Valerian the Black Dread, and roasted them alive. And after a valiant struggle in the Stormlands, a force led by Aegon's hand Oris Baratheon, accompanied by Rhaenys, who rode her dragon Meraxes, managed to take the Stormlands. It was a difficult battle, but with Meraxes' help, they managed to defeat the Doradons of Storm's End, and Oris Baratheon slayed the king himself in single combat, and then took the king's daughter as his bride, and thus established the Baratheons as the wardens of the Stormlands. The forces of the Reach and of the Westerlands gathered against Aegon, who was the self-proclaimed king of Westeros, to which Aegon and his 2 sister wives met them in an open field of battle with a force 1/5 of the size of the combined Gardner and Lannister forces. However, the dragons lit the field ablaze and easily won the battle, wiping out the entire line of House Gardner. After that, Torrhen Stark in the north yielded to Aegon without a battle. And as did Lady Shura, Queen Regent of the Vale, when Visenya rode her dragon to the Eyrie, and the young king was so impressed and just wanted to go for a ride. And thus Aegon would be officially crowned in Old Town as King of the 7 Kingdoms, although they had only conquered 6 at this point, as Dorne still resisted them, and the fight for Dorne would span decades, costing many lives on both sides, including Aegon's sister wife Rhaenys. Eventually, Aegon agreed to a peace while allowing Dorne to maintain its autonomy after receiving a mysterious letter whose contents remain unknown. However, it is known after he read it, he clenched his fist so hard it bled. And so King Aegon and his sister wives would pass into legend, spawning a long line of Targaryen kings and queens that in the present time of the book and the show ends with Daenerys as their only heir, and possibly Jon Snow as an heir as well, as is heavily theorized. That he is her nephew, and a less popular theory, one I happen to believe in though, is that Tyrion is Daenerys' half-brother, having been sired by King Aerys rather than Tywin, making Daenerys, Tyrion, and Jon the last surviving members of House Targaryen. I'm not counting Aegon V because I'm a fan of the theory that he is a Blackfyre, not a Targaryen. Anyway, I ask you, did the story I just tell of Aegon sound fairy tale-ish to you? If so, you should read about the harsh goings-ons, details such as people burning to death and being roasted alive, assassins killing people in their sleep, King Harren brutally torturing his people, and Aegon may seem like a noble, handsome fairy tale-like king, but to hear the details, he was just a brutish conqueror who happened to have a huge advantage. So in other words, Aegon's conquest was described in a typical George R.R. Martin fashion, so if he can tell such a story in the keeping of his works, I don't understand why people automatically assume he couldn't do the same for Daenerys, Jon, and Tyrion. Indeed, if the theory is correct and the 3 of them fight battles on 3 dragons, it would mirror Aegon and his 2 sister wives. Instead, it would be Daenerys and her nephew and half-brother, 2 men and 1 woman instead of 2 women and 1 man, riding 3 dragons. However, you might argue that Aegon's conquest of Westeros would be different than Daenerys fighting off a White Walker invasion, as Aegon just fought normal men, and thus it was more of a realistic battle even though dragons were involved, as opposed to dragons fighting White Walkers, which sounds more like an epic Lord of the Rings type fantasy battle good versus evil, and Martin specifically condemned the good versus evil Lord of the Rings style glorious combat. So that must mean such a thing could never happen, because if this battle took place, it would be a stereotypical good versus evil battle, right? If you think that, I think that you're using the mat again.
It was a jump to conclusions, Matt.
I personally think it's rather presumptuous to assume that if such a battle took place, it would have to be a typical good versus evil battle, and that it couldn't be done in a complicated George R. R. Martin realistic fashion. I certainly don't see why it couldn't, and would argue if you can't, then you're being narrow-minded. So now let me address the second half of the equation, the White Walkers. There are theories out there that there are a lot more to them than meets the eye, and they are not just simply evil incarnate like Sauron from Lord of the Rings. And I think that may very well be the case, but that doesn't automatically mean there will be no battle for the dawn. Just because people are complex and realistic doesn't mean they can't have battles. Otherwise, there would be no battles in Game of Thrones so far, and there's been tons of battles. Is Joffrey evil? Is Ramsay evil? That's a philosophical question. However, fans of Martin would argue they are realistic and complex characters, both of which I'm sure are modeled after historical figures and aren't simply fairy book evil like Sauron. So if Ramsay and Joffrey aren't Sauron, I don't see why the White Walkers automatically have to be either good with no battles or Sauron. Why can't they be kind of like Ramsay or Joffrey? Complex and realistic, but still not very good people who, if they had their way, nothing good would come of it. Is that simple fairy book good versus evil? I don't think it is. Also, the fight between the Targaryens and their dragons against the White Walkers would be described as two legendary moments in history coming together to form something epic: Aegon's Conquest and the Long Night. Because a question I think is worth asking is, why is A Song of Ice and Fire / Game of Thrones set in this time period? Why isn't it set during the Long Night, or when the Andals conquered Westeros, or in Old Valyria, or when the Rhoynar settled in Dorne, or Aegon's Conquest, or during the Dance with Dragons, or the Blackfyre Rebellion, or the War of the Nine Petty Kings, or Robert's Rebellion? Why is it set now? What makes now so special? Could it possibly be because it's a very special time where the Long Night meets Aegon's Conquest, where we get a version of both coming together, where dragons of fire square up against the White Walkers of ice? Well, let's look at the first book / season. How did it start? With the ominous introduction of the White Walkers. How did it end? With the spectacular rebirth of the dragons. And ever since then, both of these forces are growing more and more present. In fact, one might even say it's building towards something. Could it be building towards the two of them coming together in a series called A Song of Ice and Fire? I can certainly see why a lot of people would think so, and I don't think any narrow-minded argument that jumps to conclusions and assumes any such battle would automatically be fairy tale-ish and un-George R. R. Martin-like is a very good counter-argument to this. Now, I'm not saying this means my theory is definitely true. I'm not saying Tyrion, Jon, and Daenerys are definitely going to be the three dragon riders. I'm not saying dragons will definitely square off against the White Walkers in an epic battle. I'm sure many in the comments section will point out that George R. R. Martin likes to subvert expectations and do the unexpected, and I totally agree. So that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is to dismiss these well-reasoned and well-thought-out theories as fanboyish wishful thinking and fairy tale nonsense is narrow-minded and not taking everything into account, like these three guys, Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys, whose conquest could very likely have a deeper meaning to come for the ending of A Song of Ice and Fire. At the very least, it's not crazy to think so. So that's it for my lessons of Aegon's Conquest. To learn more about Aegon and the Long Night, there are many other YouTube videos on the subject you can check out. And there's also the World of Ice and Fire, which is a good source of information on the histories of the worlds of A Song of Ice and Fire. And be sure to check out my channel for many more Game of Thrones videos, including a series of Season 6 prediction videos I'm doing at the moment, where I focused on my predictions for a different character every week. And make sure you subscribe so you can keep up with all that. Thanks a lot for watching.